Members are reminded to refrain from engaging in personalities toward the president. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Rhode Island, Mr. Magaziner, for 5 minutes.
The time has come for the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, to make a decision. 2 years ago, the Russian army, at the direction of Vladimir Putin, invaded Ukraine, a peaceful nation, a democratic nation, an ally of the United States. Putin's missiles rain down on schools and hospitals. His bullets take the lives of children and the elderly. This is not the first time Vladimir Putin has invaded another country, slaughtering thousands of innocent people for no purpose other than his own selfish ambition. And if he is allowed to succeed in Ukraine, he will not stop there. We must continue to support Ukraine, not only because it is the right thing to do, but because if the United States abandons Ukraine, we endanger our own national security. After the attacks on this country on September 11th, more than 50 nations, including Ukraine and all of our NATO allies, came to America's defense in the war on terror. The strength of our military is multiplied by the strength of our alliances. And if we turn our backs on our ally, we weaken ourselves. This week, the Senate passed a bill that will give Ukraine the supplies and ammunition it needs to win the war. And now the decision and the fate of millions rests with just one man, the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. We know what will happen if Speaker Mike Johnson calls a vote on Ukraine funding. The bill will pass the House by an overwhelming margin. This is undisputed. It will pass the House by an overwhelming margin. Then the President will sign it. And American factories and workers will produce the ammunition and supplies the Ukrainians desperately need. Once again, America's industrial might will arm the cause of freedom, as we have so many times before. And when the Ukrainians receive that ammunition and those supplies, they will continue to use them to great effect and fight bravely as they have for the last 2 years. We know all of this will happen if Speaker Johnson allows us to vote on the bill. And if we do not vote on the bill, if Ukraine falls and millions of people have their freedom violently ripped away from them, and the light of democracy in the world glows a little less bright, and Vladimir Putin turns his menacing gaze to the democracies of Europe, and dictators around the world rejoice that the United States has retreated from its position of global leadership, it will be because one man, just one man, Speaker Mike Johnson, had the power to call a vote and didn't. 77 years ago, a young veteran named John F. Kennedy entered this chamber for the first time as a newly elected member of the House of Representatives. In his book, Profiles in Courage, Kennedy predicted, "In the days ahead, only the very courageous will be able to take the hard and unpopular decisions necessary for our survival in the struggle with a powerful enemy. Now is the time for courage. History is watching. The cause of freedom and the hopes of millions are on the line. What will Mike Johnson do?" We have a moral duty to help survivors of violent crime by ensuring that they have access to the care and support they need. That is why I rise today in support of robust funding for the Victims of Crime Act, also known as VOCA. VOCA is one of the most important sources of funding for victims of crime, and particularly survivors of sexual assault. VOCA funds rape crisis centers, emergency shelters, mental health services, and forensic labs to process DNA casework and help law enforcement bring criminals to justice. During my time as Rhode Island's General Treasurer, I managed our state's Crime Victims Compensation Fund, which is funded in part by VOCA. During those years, we helped thousands of Rhode Islanders recovering from violent incidents with health care, counseling, reimbursement for lost wages, and other expenses. I am particularly proud that we helped 300 survivors, more than 300 survivors of domestic violence, relocate to new housing away from their abusers, no doubt saving lives in the process. All of this was made possible by VOCA funding. Without VOCA, a survivor of domestic abuse may be turned away from emergency care and shelter because there are enough beds. These are necessary services. As Congress prepares to consider the FY24 appropriations bills in just a few weeks, we must fully fund VOCA at the administration's recommended levels. I urge my colleagues to stand with survivors, stand with children, and support robust funding for VOCA. I yield back.